Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Focus Daily TV. Throughout this week and the end of last week, we were speaking about how black people lost in the land of Oz. And I went over various pieces of information and evidence to prove that lost nation of God's children and their existence as far as it pertains to North America and America specifically. Today we're going to go back to a little film we watched earlier, and this time we're going to watch it with the information that I presented in mind. Be a nice little short show. Hit that like button, subscribe, support the channel, Focus Daily TV, at Cash App and Patreon. All right, people, let's go.
All right, this is The Wizard of Oz. This is a copy from about 1920, but this story had been out by, I think, for almost 30 years by that time. And it's a great children's story, but there is a theory out there that L. Frank Baum did not write this just as a children's story, and I'm going to give you a competing theory, and it's really laid out, and you should read all of this. It's The Wizard of Oz as a Monetary Allegory by Hugh Rockoff from Rutgers University. We'll put this up on, I don't know, put it up on the Blaze or glenbeck.com or something. This is a great, it really explains it all in depth, and I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights here. But everybody knows the story of Wizard of Oz, right? But you don't know about the big crash that happened in the 1890s. And if you compare the story and the monetary politics of the era, it's known as the populist era, it'll all suddenly jump out at you. The movie changed a few things that are not in the book. It was right here. You see it. Dorothy stood up and found she was in her stockings for the.
Now, if you notice, Glenn Beck has on his pirate regalia his cross and bone symbolism. So once again, he's speaking in code. But hopefully, through the information that I presented as thus far, some are able to see through this code.
Silver shoes had fallen off for a flight through the air and were lost forever in the desert. They're not ruby slippers, they're silver. And the yellow brick road is not yellow in the book, it is gold. Gold bricks. In 1893, what you have to know is that farmers and miners helped
just listen.
Form a free silver movement. And they were applying pressure to Congress. They were all pro-silver because they wanted to drive up inflationary rates. Why? For the same reason that our Fed is doing it now, to pay off their debts. They wanted to pay their land off cheaply and get cheaper loans. And instead of working within the system, they tried to get Congress to go in and intervene. At first, they rejected them, but then Congress was bought off and Congress helped. Congress caved and provided a solution.
The who, what, when, where, why, and how applies here. Who paid off Congress? And once that question is answered, then you will begin to see how this whole setup and robbery and thievery of God's temple took place.
To the problem. And they mandated that the U.S. buy millions of ounces of silver. So people went out and they redeemed their silver notes for gold. But it wasn't long before the minimum limit of gold reserves was reached, and you couldn't redeem your gold notes for gold anymore. Remember, this is the time when gold coins were there. People didn't want the currency because they knew everything was being changed, so panic ensued. Well, no one knew it at the time.
He's throwing up his hand symbolism.
But The Wizard of Oz, which was written in 1900, was written based, according to some, on this silver crash and also subsequent economic crisis. And I want to show you a little bit.
Here on Focus Daily TV, I come to present the law of the land, which is God's law, as opposed to the law of the sea, maritime admiralty law, which they have us all deeply up under. However, the truth shall make us free. And what I do on this show is present evidence to prove that truth, that America belongs to the Afro-Americans, that the Afro-Americans are the indigenous people of this land, that when the pirates or pilgrims first arrived, they found a thriving Afro-American civilization, castles, palaces, gold, riches. And once arriving, they immediately began to seek to disenfranchise the indigenous people of this land. While this evidence is not readily available in any form or fashion, traces of this truth exist through sources such as media, music, politics, entertainment, and the law itself. The laws that the Federal Reserve and or the federal government created align specifically with the prophecies that were being revealed, that are being revealed in the Bible. Let's go.
Dorothy is the little farm girl. Dorothy's the little farm girl, and she...
In the Bible, it kind of speaks of the children of God being brides, the brides of the brides of Christ. So Dorothy could be symbolized as a bride. Dorothy actually represents the Afro-American people, the children of God, the brides of Christ.
Represents the U.S. She represents all of us. And she's knocked out during a tornado, and the storm wakes up, gets her and pulls her and her house into the wonderful world of Oz. The tornado, which is here, the tornado actually represents the free silver movement that swept across America at the time. So this is the tornado, the free silver movement. When she comes to in the land of Oz,
the tornado represents things like the stock market crash, the Great Depression, tactics that were intentionally placed upon the Afro-Americans so that they would lose faith in God and put their faith into the Federal Reserve System. Biblically, in the Bible, this is known as worshiping other gods, worshiping idols, worshiping the Federal Reserve rather than remaining steadfast in following the commandments of God, the Father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
She realizes that her house has crushed the Wicked Witch of the East, which is bottom right here. No, that's the Wicked Witch of the West. The Wicked Witch of the East, I don't know where she is. But she actually represents the house coming down on her foot. That is the bankers in the East. The populist twister, if you will, was aimed at the witch. The witch represents the Eastern financial industrial interest, their gold standard and their political allies, the big banks back east.
Now, speaking of curse, chapter 28 of Deuteronomy speaks about the curses that shall fall upon the children of God if they refuse to follow his commandment. That storm brought in such curse, where in the late 1800s, early 1900s, we completely lost control of our God-given land.
East, that's what that does. And the ally was really Grover Cleveland, if you will, was aimed at the witch. The witch represents the Eastern financial industrial interest, their gold standard and their political allies, the big banks back east. That's what that does. And the ally was really Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland was a guy who was not for this at all. He wasn't for the silver standard, and so they needed to make him into a bad guy. The enslaved Munchkins had no idea what was really going on. The death of the witch, they celebrated it, but they knew about the silver shoes here. Ruby slippers, they're in the book, Silver. They knew that this was good, the yellow brick road was good, and the ruby slippers were good, but they didn't know why. That represents the enslavement of the average person that just didn't understand what was going on. That's representative of how the elites back then knew how silver worked, but the farmers didn't. Dorothy says, how can I possibly get home from this? They tell her to seek out the Wizard of Oz in the...
Okay. The true way for Dorothy to get home is for Dorothy to stand up and follow the commandments of the Father through his Son Christ. That's the only way that we will be able to get home. We won't be able to file no paperwork, no 503c or UCC paperwork. It is only through accepting the will of the Father through his Son Christ that we can be redeemed and receive salvation and returned to our original glory.
Emerald City. Well, here's the yellow brick road. Remember, the yellow brick road is gold. The Emerald City is Washington, D.C. Her journey there represents the populist effort at the time to get enough people to come along with them and acquire power in Washington. Dorothy and her friends face all kinds of hazards along the way. They're turned away by the wizard, who has no sympathy for their plight. The wizard is the politicians of the time. He's just a political guy. And the political guys wouldn't help them unless they got something in return. That's why the wizard says, kill the wicked witch of the West and bring me her broom. Just like politicians. And then just like a politician, we later learn that his power is achieved through lies and deception. The Scarecrow, the Tin Man.
Okay, the Scarecrow, he represents what's legally in law known as a straw man, a corporate entity that was placed upon the lives and the souls of the Afro-American people, placing their names in all caps, thereby making them tradable on the stock market, through banking, or what have you. The Tin Man, he didn't have a heart. He was heartless. He represents the TIN, the tax identity number. Through such taxes, we are handled by a heartless group known as the Federal Reserve. They have no love. Their hearts are of stone in their treatment towards the children of God and the public at large.
And the Lion. Who are they? Well, the brave guy. And the...
Okay, the lion is the children of God, how we have lost our strength and lost our courage. And rather than standing tall as the men of the children of God, we fell victim to this federal system. And day by day, we still refuse to stand up and speak truth, speak the word of God. But that's what Focus Daily TV here to do. speak for that truth, to stand up and try to make a difference with this truth that I'm presenting to the Afro-Americans. Everybody is invited, but it is by awakening the Afro-Americans that all can also receive salvation, like a Jews Gentile type thing.
The political guys wouldn't help them unless they got something in return. That's why the wizard says, kill the wicked witch of the West and bring me her broom. Just like politicians. And then just like a politician, we later learn that his power is achieved through law.
Hit the like button, subscribe, support the channel, Cash App, Patreon at Focus Daily TV.
Lies and deception. The Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion. Who are they? Well, the brainless Scarecrow is the Midwestern farmer whose years of being ridiculed as simpletons because they just didn't understand their own economic plight.
Remember, Glenn Beck is speaking in code. He's actually referring to the Afro-Americans.
Had them
Let's run that
believing
back.
the farmer whose years of being ridiculed as simple, the Tin Man and the Lion. Who are they? Well, the brainless Scarecrow is the Midwestern farmer whose years of being ridiculed as simpletons because they just didn't understand their own economic plight. Had them believing in it. The Scarecrow falls on hard yellow bricks, a reference that gold was hurting the farmers. But he also demonstrates common sense and resilience in the end. He has a brain, after all. The farmer figures it out. The Tin Man is the nation's industrial worker who's been just reduced into nothing but a machine. Remember, he used to have talent, and then they became cogs in the wheel, and big business did it to him.
By leaning to the Federal Reserve System, we immediately became debt slaves, forced to work and toil for our days. It's like we bit the apple in the Garden of Eden, and we became servants and slaves to the world, to the Federal Reserve System.
He's rusted and worn out. He's unemployed, like many workers of the period. And the last is the Lion, courage. Who is this guy? Well, this is William Jennings Bryan. He is a politician at the time. He's a congressman and then later Democratic.
Political figures that they place before us to sway our choices, to propagate this information and this coming oppression known as the stock market crash that they wanted people to fear so that people would turn to the Federal Reserve for relief rather than remaining with the commandments and laws of the Lord God, of Israel, of the Bible, the Creator.
Presidential candidate from 1896 to 1900. Bryan was known for his roaring rhetoric, and he was portrayed in the press as a lion. He was a free silver advocate. Supporters said he was courageous, but critics said he was a coward when it came down to it. His supporters also slammed him when he failed to fight for free silver in the election of 1900. He realized, okay, I got to back off of that because that's not getting me any place. Dorothy in the movie travels down the yellow brick road. In the novel, it's called the Road of Yellow Brick. On the way to the Emerald City, she's doing so in her silver slippers. That is gold remaining supreme and the free silver movement. And here is the bimetallic standard. The Wicked Witch wants to get the slippers back.
Yesterday we spoke about the gold standard. And that's what he's referring to when we were at a point where all money was backed by gold. Fast forward to when we chose to follow the Federal Reserve, our money became backed by the souls of individuals, as spoke about in Revelations.
But her powers are incomplete because she has to have the silver shoes, proving in the book, the theory is, it's called the Road of Yellow Brick. On the way to the Emerald City, she's doing so in her silver slippers. That is gold remaining supreme and the free silver movement. And here is the bimetallic standard. The Wicked Witch wants to get the slippers back, but her powers are incomplete because she has to have the silver shoes, proving in the book, the theory is, that gold requires the existence of silver as a standard right along with it. And we all know what happens to the witch in the end, right? Dorothy splashes water on her, and she begins to melt. Now, you're going to have to...
Okay, everybody. Once again, bear with me. I'm new to this podcast, YouTube streets. So I get a little nervous from time to time. But until the next time, focus daily, y'all. I'm out.